Well, hello and welcome along to the Andrew Eborn Show with me, Andrew Eborn. And we're going to go to the other side of the world, to the Bermuda Triangle itself, to join the wonderful Tony Brannon. How are you doing, Tony?
I am great, Andrew. It's great. Honor, a pleasure to be with you from Bermuda. Thank you.
An absolute thrill. And we've been having all sorts of fun. We were talking earlier and then we disappeared into this Bermuda Triangle, but came back. Always a thrill. And how is life in Bermuda?
Bermuda's great. It's a beautiful island. We've done really well in the sense of the government's been really good at managing COVID-19. They came down hard at the very beginning last March. As a matter of fact, I was in England at the beginning of last March. And when I saw what was happening and France was closing and Italy and everything was happening, I was in a friend's flat right by Putney Bridge, and we were watching the BBC on Friday the 13th of March. Oh, and I said, listen to my friend Robert. I said, look, I think I'll better get on a plane back to Bermuda because I might get stuck. I could see, and then I found out there was 2 seats left on the British Airways flight that night, so I headed back. And you know, it's been a year, or a very, very hard year for musicians and entertainers. It doesn't matter whether you're West End, Broadway, whether you're Paul McCartney, the Rolling Stones, or a pub singer, you know, down at Temple Bar or something like that. I mean, everyone has been completely affected by COVID, and we'll talk a little bit about Bermuda in a minute, but I thought it would be just good to hit on this because Bermuda did manage it. It managed it well in the sense of they shut down access to the island for 2 to 3 months, air flights and stuff like that. So we could, you know, we wanted to protect the population, and the government was very, very good at that. And then we started to allow people back in, and the testing was really good here. They really got the testing down really well. And then we had another wave of, started some more flights came in, you know, you get 1 or 2 off British Airways, 1 or 2 off the States with the test positive. And then you get, you know, how the viruses go, you know, they just, you know, they spread. That's just what it's all about. And you can't see it. And so you can't touch it. And so we had a little bit of a ramp up in December. They pushed it back. We went into lockdown again. Well, they're sort of quarantining at night and stuff like that, curfew at night. And now it came right back down. And now we just, you know, it's been okay. It was just a little bit of an uptick in the last couple of days. But, you know, I've been vaccinated. I've had my first shot. I'm waiting on the second one. Next week, the British government is supplying Bermuda with the Pfizer vaccine. So my thing is that if we want to get the planet back on track, everyone should get the vaccine. That's my thing. I've heard of all the naysayers and all the conspiracy theories. I've seen it all. You know, what Bill Gates this and Bill Gates that and this and that and the other, and Dr. Fauci. Look, I believe in the science of it. If we want to get back to playing again, getting on stages and having fun and laughing and everything, that's the whole point of what the song came about. Hope was, you know, I want to dance and sing and laugh again. I hope this tide will soon turn.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Tony. I mean, what is clear is that the devastating effect that it's had on the industry. And it doesn't matter if you're the biggest artist in the world or, as you say, a little pub singer. The reality is nobody has been able to perform to the usual sort of crowds. And it's not just the artists themselves. It's a knock-on effect for the technicians, for the roadies, for the concessions, all of that sort of stuff.
All of it. I was actually listening to a podcast that Bob Lefsitz did a podcast, and he had Harvey Goldsmith on as a guest about 10 days ago. And Harvey was talking about all of this stuff. And it really is. And then you think about it, it's just not the entertainment business. What about the sports? Yeah. What about Liverpool Stadium, Manchester United, about Arsenal, Giant Stadium? You can't go to a sports game because you can't have the crowds. And so it's affected so many different industries. But of course, me being connected with the music business, this has been very close to my heart. Now, when I woke up one morning, it was actually, I'll tell you the date, it was November the 2nd. And I've been through the ups and downs of emotional struggle with this. You know, I've been out of work now. I haven't had a dollar in income since last March. And every other entertainer in Bermuda is the same way, you know, whether you're in a reggae band or you're in a hotel band or whatever. So we're all the same. I woke up this morning on November the 2nd, wrote down these words, and I sent it to my friend Jimmy in Barbados, a lifelong friend, a musician in Barbados. And I sent the words to him, and he said, look, I think there's a song here. He put it together. It came back sounding like a bit like a Jimmy Buffett song, to be honest, at the beginning, with a hint of Jeff Lynne in it. To be honest, the comedy sounded a bit Jeff Lynne-ish. And so I sent this song to a friend of mine in New York, a bass player called Will Lee. And Will Lee's played on so many records. He was in the Paul Sheffer band from beginning to end with Letterman, and he's played on loads of records. A long-time friend of mine. I said, look, what do you think of this song? He says, I want to play bass on it. I thought, well, if Will Lee thinks, if he wants to play bass, I guess it's a good, okay song. All right. So then another guy that I grew up with in Bermuda was Andy Newmark. Now, Andy Newmark lives in Kent. And Andy's sort of discography and who he's performed with is endless. You know, Clapton, Sly Stone, you name it, David Gilmour. So I called Andy up and said, Andy, would you do it? And he said, well, you know, it's like, you know, it's COVID and I don't want. But anyway, we got him into a studio, Rimshot Studios in Kent, and he did the drums. So we had the drums and we had the bass. We had that sorted against the original structure of the track. And so then I called up a friend of mine in Boston, a guy called Derek Dyer, who's a saxophone player, played for years with Tina Turner, and the last stretch of his career was with Joe Cocker, right through the end. Him and Mitch Shakur was the band leader for Cocker. Anyway, I said and he grew up in Bermuda. His dad was in a band just like my dad was in a band in Bermuda at the same hotel, funnily enough, the Hamilton Princess. And so I said, look, would you like to play sax on this? Because he's a great saxophone. So he plays in the sort of screaming sax style as like King Curtis or, you know, or Clarence Clemens, that kind of style. And I thought this would be great. And then he added sax and it was really good what he did. And I said, well, look, Jimmy had done the vocals. And I said, no disrespect to my good friend Jimmy in Barbados. I said, but, you know, this is too good of a song now for just us to be croaking away on it. So I said to Derek, can you get who do you know that's really, really good? A guy with a lot of soul, a lot of punch. He said, funnily enough, there's a guy here called Tim Pike. And so I thought, oh, who's Tim Pike? Well, you know, he's a sort of journeyman guy that's been out there in loads of bands, but he was in Paul Allen's band. Now, Paul Allen was co-founder of Microsoft with Bill Gates. Yes. And he had a band called the Underthinkers. So, you know, Paul's way of getting his jollies off was to play music. And so Tim fronted his band for a number of years, and Paul would bring in all sorts of great players, you know, Joe Walsh and people like that. And so, but when he did the vocal and we heard the vocal, we said, oh, this is really good. This is sort of somewhere in the middle of Paul Rodgers and somewhere in that vein. Creedence Clearwater, you know, John Fogerty, somewhere in that kind of thing. So we got a great song. And then I listened to it a bit more and I thought, you know what, this song really needs now is a gospel choir. Right. So funnily enough, I had been discussing a bunch of things with a guy in Bermuda called Wayne Keynes, who was a politician here, but he also is a member of the church, Seventh-day Adventist Church, and he took me up to see his choir. On a few occasions, I went up to listen to them. And it was, you know, when you go into a black church and you hear those voices booming, you know, Sam Smith uses black church choirs on some of his stuff, and there's nothing like it. So I said, well, he said, yeah, we'll get the choir. But the problem is that was when, by the time we were getting to this, is when we started having our little wave of COVID in Bermuda in December. And so everyone was afraid to come to the studio and blah, 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 and numbers and stuff like this. So I said to Johnny Woolridge, who's the guy that ran the studio in Bermuda, who worked with Mitch Shakur and getting together the choir arrangement. He said, well, listen, we'll just get them in one by one. we'll just build one by one, and we'll track them 3 times, and we'll get 4 or 5 of them, local singers, and we'll stack them all up, and it'll sound like a choir, which it does. Sounds like a good choir, and some great Bermudians, that really came together on that. And so when we put it all together, then what I thought was, okay, we need to get somebody really good at mixing this. So a good friend of mine that lives in Weybridge, Paul Muggleton's married to Judy Suk.
Right.
And Paul grew up, and I grew up in Bermuda. He was in the first rock and roll band in Bermuda called the Savages. And he used to play with Andy Newmark too at one time in Bermuda. But so I said to Paul, can we get Matt Tate, who does all of Judy's mixing, and he's done a lot of people's mixing, so I called Matt up and said, would you mix this track? And he's down in Bath. So it was really an interesting thing to think, we put this track together. Will Lee was over with his wife in France because they wanted to be out of New York, because New York was like, whoa, it's too much COVID in New York. So they went to France. So they're sitting in the south of France. So Will played his bass in France, and he played his drums in Kent. And because this is what people do now, you can just fly tracks around and stuff like that. And so we came up with this song, Hope.
Absolutely brilliant. And what I love, it is, as you say, it's like clickbait, if you like, in terms of the names that you can drop on here. They have worked with every major artist on the planet, haven't they?
Well, especially Andy and Will, and Andy and Will especially. Derek was also, he's done quite a bit himself with different people. Andrea Bocelli, Brian Ferry. Of course, Andy worked with Brian Ferry for years with Roxy Music.
Yeah.
But yes, so we had really great players. But then what happened was, once we got the song mixed and mastered, I had it mastered in New York.
Right.
I sent it to Michael Douglas. Now, Michael's a good friend of mine. He lived
as you do.
As you do.
This is what I love, Tony, because it is a who's who. We'll come on to why you know all these people, but as you do, Michael Douglas, send him the track.
So I sent Michael the track, and he came back, and it was Michael. He's like, "Gee, Tony, this sounds like a song for the times." And I'm not a very good impersonator, but anyway, that's me and Michael. So he said, "This is really great." He says, "I really love this track." And then all of a sudden, now the Blue, as we're getting ready to launch on March the 1st, Michael does a PR for us.
Yeah.
And he throws a snowball, and he says, we all need a whole lot more hope, right?
Right.
And then you do what you do. And one of the things that I've been really good at, because I was in the advertising business as well as being a musician, I used to own themusic.com at that time.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I've got to touch everybody I know. So I reached out to Steve Hackett, and I said, "Steve, would you help us with this song? And what do you think?" He goes, he's been on Twitter pushing it, and and Julian Lennon's pushed it, and Heather Nova, lots of people.
It is quite incredible, and I think the reason, Tony, that firstly, your connections with the industry are phenomenal. Looking at the whole pedigree in your father's business, starting 40 Thieves and so on and so forth, which we come on to. Yeah. The number of people coming behind this is because that's what they want. They all want hope. We've all been affected by this,
and you know what?
This as the vehicle makes sense, doesn't it?
It does. And what this is about. Derek Dyer was the one that kept saying, Tony, this has got nothing to do with Andy Newmark, you, me, or any. This is about the song. We have a song here that can connect with what people have been feeling and what people are going through. I mean, it really just says it. And it's tough when we're putting out a song. We love everyone to hear it. We love everyone to get behind it. We're not a working band. We're not a band that's going to do a gig next week. Well, we won't be doing a gig next week anyway, but you know what I mean? So it's a one-off song. So we thought we're going to just put it out and roll with it, because we're not signed to a record label. And we didn't want to send it around and have them, go through the process of, oh, well, I don't know, or yes, but it'll take 3 months to release it. This had to come out now, whilst all of this is, while everyone's still feeling the effects of COVID. And let me tell you, when last year in the middle of the summer, I thought, oh, by Christmas it'll all be over. Be done. And look where we are. We're now into March. We're going to be heading into April. Yeah. You're getting mutations. You're getting all sorts of things. So, I will say
you're absolutely right. And we do need that mess. I mean, Harvey Goldsmith, you mentioned earlier. He's a neighbour and a chum, and he's been on the show a few times, and so on and so forth. And he says it's not absolute the devastating effect where he's organising these big events, and it is. Everybody's come down to effectively doing these remote things and trying to do shows in that sort of way. But also for the big shows, they're not going to happen overnight. It takes a lot of planning and so on and so forth. You have to do the ticket sales. A number of months need to go past when you get everything set up. And that's why it's so important to shine a spotlight on the devastating effect that it's had, particularly on the performing arts, as well as others.
It absolutely has, and one of the things Harvey was saying on that podcast I was listening to, the Bob Lefsetz's podcast with him, was that, the thing about being able to put on the big shows is who's going to insure them right now, right? And that was another big thing, who's going to insure them? Then you've got the issue of touring bands and Brexit and the whole thing about that, and that's a whole nother discussion. But suffice it to say, there's all sorts of problems involved that COVID has brought upon all of us. And so the psychological effect has been huge. We've obviously lost, lots and lots of people all over the world, now in the millions of people that have died. And so look, families have lost loved ones and so on and so forth. But the other devastating knock-on is the fact that, there is no livelihood. There is no income. I mean, I was watching a guy on the BBC the other night who was a West End guy, and he's taken up carpentry. Yeah. And he's loving it, but because you have to do things to get by, and I'm scrambling in Bermuda myself,
and people forget that, because at the end of the day, they all assume that if you're a big star on the stage and things like that, that all of a sudden you're immune to this sort of side. And the reality is it's a devastating effect. Whatever happens, people need to put food on the table. If you're not getting an income in, and you have these huge expenses still going out, it's causing a huge problem for lots of people.
Yes, it really is. But anyway, we can dwell on the doom and the gloom of it all. What we got to try and figure out is how to get through it, how to make it through. And I get back to, I saw Michael Douglas actually yesterday was speaking out, because he's a spokesperson for the United Nations. And so he's speaking about the sooner we can all get vaccinated, the sooner we can all get back to getting around a golf in, getting down to the pub, or getting to, to go to a restaurant again. I mean, in Bermuda, because it's been managed quite well, we can actually, at this point, hopefully the numbers don't swell up. We've had a little uptick over the last couple of days. But the government, work with it. If it looks like it's getting a little out of hand, then they put the curfew back in. Right. And so, and the testing, as I say, is really good here. But it's a hotel business, the airline business. My friends in Barbados, I mean, 90% of their income's derived from people going to Barbados on holiday, going to stay in a hotel, and they're empty, and the restaurants are empty, and it's just horrible, really.
Well, it's devastating. I've got friends who are in Barbados at the moment. I was there at the beginning of last year, and you picture the difference then as to what's happening now. But as you say, what we need in all of this, because the knock-on effect, not just on people's livelihood, but on their mental health and so on and so forth, is quite devastating. What's really interesting, Tony, is that you can call on your Black Book to get people together to help with this message of hope. And it's really interesting to look at that journey as to how you got there. And it all started with your father starting in the business. As you say, he came over to life in Bermuda. Talk to us about that story when he first came over and decided to stay.
Well, he was one of three poor Irish kids from Stoke-on-Trent. But the one leg up that he had was Grandma Brannon gave him piano lessons. So he had a leg up on his brother Morris and sister Eileen, and he did the Royal School of Music thing and the whole 9 yards, and did grade 8, and then he went down to Trinity College of Music, joined the Coldstream Guards, He was in the Coldstream Guards, and then after the war, joined a jazz band in London, and he was playing around. And there was an ad for a band in Bermuda at the Hamilton Princess, which at the time was owned by Billy Butland.
Right.
The Butland's holiday cabs. But Billy Butland had, at the time, owned it, and then it was later sold to a guy called Daniel K. Ludwig, an American billionaire. But Dad came here on a 6-month contract, 6 guys. And when they arrived at the airport, and they drove across the causeway, they looked out at the turquoise, azure blue waters, and they all looked at each other and they went, "We're not leaving this place. We're not leaving." So, and so they extended their contract, and he ended up staying, and he worked in a music store in town. Then he opened up his own music store, and then he thought, "Hey, I'd love to open up a nightclub." So he got involved with some local Bermuda businessmen and opened up the 40 Thieves in 1962, and his opening act was Mel Torme.
Fantastic.
And he was a great nightclub operator, and he embraced not only international talent, but he embraced local Bermudian talent. So we always had local calypso bands or local musicians of some sort, jazz bands and stuff like that. But the tourists really liked the calypso stuff. That was, people were, sold this whole thing of coming to Bermuda, listen to calypso music and stuff like that. So he had that for years and years and years. And but the beginning was sort of crooners, Nancy Wilson, Eartha Kitt, and people like this, Neil Sedaka, Neil Diamond, Dion, and then he went into the soul side of things. He brought in Dionne Warwick, he brought in Ike and Tina Turner, Aretha Franklin, Cilla Black, then some of the Lonnie Donegan. I remember having dinner with Lonnie Donegan one night, and I was, let me see, I would have been about 13 when I met Lonnie, and he came over for dinner, and I was like so impressed that he was wearing Beatle boots. He was wearing the same boots. And I was asking, I said, "Do you know John Lennon?" He says, "Yes, I know John Lennon." We had I had a fab, but I just remember as a kid being sort of, "Oh, this is amazing," And funnily enough, that year in 1964, what happened, because all our families lived in England. My mother's, my grannies lived over there. Grandma Brannon lived in Stoke-on-Trent. My mother's mother lived in Gosport, and so typically we'd all go over, my mother, my sister and I, and spend the summers in England. Well, Dad got on running the 40 Thieves and the rest of it, and he was left alone for the summer while we were over there for 2 months. And in 64, he said, "Why don't you stay back with me?" And I was I was 13, and he said, "Look, we're going to go to New York because I've got to book some more bands for the club." So he went up and met with the different show business people, and we were in this club called the Friars Club for lunch. And this guy, Jackie Green, says to my dad, "So, gee, hey, Cherish, anything the kid wants to do while he's in New York?" So so I said, "Well, Mr. Green, I found out that the Beatles are playing in New York this week." "Oh, gee, kid, that's a real tough ticket, but don't worry about it. I got you two." So that's how it was, right? You're on the inside, everybody. And of course, Norman Weiss and all the rest of the guys. So what do we do? Well, first of all, I went down to Broadway and saw Hard Day's Night.
Right.
It was but I couldn't hear anything because all the girls were screaming. It was in a movie theater and there was screaming. Then we went to Forest Hills. It was August 28th, 1964. And that was the night that changed my life because I got to see them. Now, other people, their lives were changed on by the Ed Sullivan Show when the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show, which just a few months before. My friend Will Lee's life changed because he saw the Beatles. Andy Newmark, so many people, wow, this is what I want to do with my life, right? And so anyway, I got to see the Beatles. And then what I said to my dad, I said, "Gee, Dad," I said, "since you know all the guys, why don't you get the Beatles to come to Bermuda?" So let's get them to Bermuda. And so he actually made the call. He made the call. And at the time, the artists that were playing in Bermuda, and this is what the going rate was for nightclubs in those days. You could buy any band you wanted, Wilson Pickett, Dionne Warwick, Chuck Jackson, Ike and Tina, whatever it was. It was $2,500 a week, room and board, airfare, and 6 nights a week, 2 shows a night. That's what everyone worked for.
Yeah.
So anyway, they got back to Dad and they said, yeah, hey Terry, yeah, no problem. The Beatles, it'll be 10 grand for 25 minutes. So my old man's thinking to himself, $10,000 for 25 minutes, and I'm paying $2,500 for Mike and Tina Turner for 6 shows, 6 nights a week, 2 shows a night. He says, and guess what? No one in Bermuda knows who the Beatles are. You know, it's 75% of the population are Black, and so you know they didn't know who the Beatles were, and just a few kids that went to school in England knew who the Beatles were. And so he looked at me and he said, son, I have to tell you, I'm terribly sorry. I will lose my shirt if I bring the Beatles to Bermuda. And that was actually a business reality.
And I think it's a business decision. I mean, your heart, as you say, I mean, tickets, firstly, that massive concert on the 28th of August, 1964, it showed you the power of connections. And I think the ticket price then was only $5.95. I think you've still got the stub there somewhere. $5.95.
$5.95 that we didn't even pay because we got given 2 tickets. But you know, and what a change the world's been. And you know what, the other thing that was fantastic for me was when Dad was booking all his acts for Bermuda, the English side, he dealt with a guy called Cyril Berlin, and Cyril Berlin handled Lonnie Donegan, Roy Castle, and people like that.
A legend in the business. And I think he gave you your first guitar, didn't he?
He did. Cyril gave me you've been reading up on my bio. He sure did. He gave me a Futurama guitar, which was fantastic. But Cyril took me for lunch one day, and the London management was almost towards the end of Regent Street, just before Oxford Circus, right? On the left. And he came down the stairs, and right below it, there was a restaurant that he went down the stairs, almost under the street level. It was called Very's. Yeah. It was where a lot of show business guys went for lunch. They were all in there wearing a pinstripe jacket like you, smoking Cuban cigars.
The big ones, absolutely. Yeah, halfway down to Oxford Street, absolutely. Go with a cigar.
And so we were having lunch one day, and right towards the end, we were having lunch, and he says, hey, I want you to meet this guy. So he brings this guy up to the table, and he introduces me to Morris Kinn, who owned the New Musical Express.
Right.
So Morris said, he said, listen, would you like a copy of the NME? I'll send it to your boarding school every week. And so I knew everything that was going on. I was more interested in getting the NME than worrying about my history studies. You know, I was like, you know, I knew what was coming out, when the records were coming out. And, you know, I think it was wasn't it Tuesday mornings they used to release singles back in those days? Yeah. And so I knew everything that was going on. And when records were going to be released, I never forget reading one article in NME, which I remember when Clapton had started this band, Blind Faith, and he was part of Blind Faith. And I remember they interviewed him and they said, so you know, there's this super group here, Eric. He says this is going to be amazing, and he says, what do you think? He says, well, let me tell you something. Yeah, we're okay. He says, but if we played together for 50 years, we'd never be as good as the band from America, which everybody kneeled and genuflected to. But it was just little things like that you remember from being, you know, you look forward to your magazine every week and you read it from cover to cover. And then what happened was, you know, it was like, I bagged your magazine, Tony. All the boys were like, oh, after you. It was great. It was great. So I was lucky that my dad had all these great people come to Bermuda. And then I got to meet people in London, you know, over the years, and the same with the States. And then when I went to university in America, my old man persuaded me. What I did was I did 2 Tom Jones tours as a roadie in 70 and 71. Yeah. It was a fantastic experience all through America, and seeing America for what it was back then, and seeing the reality.
How did that come? As you say, an expert on Tony Brannon. You can test me on your CV, on your biography. Fantastic. How did the Tom Jones tour come about?
That came about because Tom had played at the 40 Thieves in Bermuda.
Right.
And And my old man said to Lloyd Greenfield, who was the US agent looking after Tom on behalf of Gordon Mills at the time, said, listen, I really want to find something for Tony to do this summer. He says, well, listen, we could use an assistant on the tour. Why, he'd come on the tour. And that was the first tour, the first big tour. And what an experience that was, because it was the Count Basie Orchestra. It was Gladys Knight and the Pips, and then there was a comedian called Norm Crosby, who's just recently died.
Yeah.
Who was a fantastic guy. Anyway, it was just great. And then the musicians that he had on tour were Big Jim Sullivan, the guitar player, great session player from England, played on Gilbert O'Sullivan stuff, Engelbert stuff. He was one of those stable guys that Johnny Spence used him a lot on records. And John Rostall was the bass player from the Shadows, and then a great trumpet player, probably England's greatest trumpet player of all time, in my view. It's a guy called Derek Watkins, who played the trumpet parts on every James Bond theme song, right up to Skyfall. And then he sadly died right after Skyfall. But it's Derek's, when you hear those high-pitched trumpets on any James Bond theme song, it was him.
Right.
And then the drummer was a great jazz drummer called Kenny Clare, who was fantastic. That was the first tour. And then the second tour, it was different. They didn't use the Basie band. They used a band out of Las Vegas, Jeff Sturgis and Universe. But it was really an experience to go through America, see it for what it was, see the difference between North and South. There's a real difference, and everything you heard about what the South was like, was I saw it was what it was like. The Basie band didn't stay in the same hotel, and stuff like that. There was that stuff.
And it wasn't real. I mean, the great thing you also discovered, I mean, your father, he taught you about, it's all about connections. You immerse yourself in this whole sort of music world. Yeah. And a lot of the people are very generous with their time in terms of teaching you guitar. And you started piano when you were 6, but you moved on to guitar, as you say, when Cyril gave you your first one. But these musicians, the great and the good, were teaching you how to play guitar.
Yeah, Big Jim Sullivan taught me some stuff on the guitar, which it's just a very cool blues run, and it's just something that I play all the time. I just go, hey Jim, thanks for teaching me that, and so it's been great. I mean, it's been an amazing journey. When I was at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, I joined the concert commission as part of in being involved with the team, and we had so many great bands come through there, from Yes
and Joni Mitchell and all sorts of people. And when you became secretary of that prestigious thing, obviously you're calling on a lot of your expertise, which you learned from your father, for negotiating the deals. How would you deal with negotiations?
Well, actually, it wasn't what I did. I was more sort of I had other sort of job functions for the commission. But there was a guy called Bob Davis who did all the contracts and did all the signing up of all the bands, and he's a great guy. We still talk and stuff like that. But it was just an amazing time to be there. Again, that was from 73 to 76. And it was a real being exposed to different styles of music, which I think that music is a university unto itself.
Yeah,
absolutely. You're experiencing different things musically. I remember the first thing that blew my mind was we snuck out of boarding school in 1969 in our sixth form year. We snuck out. There's a guy called Will, not Will Lee, the bass player, but another Will Lee from Bath. We snuck out down the hill to the pavilion to watch Keith Emerson and the Nice. I'd never seen anything like it. It was a guy playing Brandenburg concertos to rock music. I was just like, wow, this is just amazing. But then when I was at Cornell and I saw John McLaughlin and the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and they came in, it was a February night, and Ithaca, New York was usually bitterly cold at that time of year, and it was a particularly bitter cold night. They arrived at the back of Bailey Hall. It was just a small 3,000-seater place at Cornell University. They came in. He walks in with Jerry Goodman and Jan Hammer and the guys, and the roadies pull out the guitar, and Jerry Goodman's got the violin, and I watched them play scales that I've never seen anybody play at that speed and that complexity, and I was bedazzled by it. I went, oh, I just probably should give up. I should probably give up now. But it was great. And it was just fantastic experience to see that. And, you know, to see that there is what the differences are in people's skill sets. And it doesn't make anybody better than or less than, you know, just, you know, you don't have to, everyone doesn't have to play as fast as John McLaughlin or Al Di Meola. But when you see guys at that level, and you just, it's just it was a mind-blowing experience for me to see that live and to be up close. You'd be backstage watching them.
And that's the difference, because you have been, music has been a constant theme in your whole life, and you've immersed yourself with the greatest, some of the greatest players on the planet, and you've seen it from all sides, because they always say, Shakespeare turns around and say, if you prick me, do I not bleed? If you tickle me, do I not laugh? A lot of these people are great, and they're very generous with their time and so on and so forth. And people often say, oh, I met such and such a superstar and they were wonderful. And another person will turn around and say, oh, I met them and they were really rotten. And the answer is probably true on both those occasions, because we have good days and bad days, don't we? And I think it's all a question of working on that sort of basis. The common theme, however, is that a lot of these people are incredibly generous and teaching you about that sort of side, getting you immersed in music, teaching you guitar riffs and so on and so forth. It was a great lesson, much better than the academic one, wasn't it?
You know, the thing about it was I actually enjoyed my school and my boarding school. I didn't particularly enjoy the religious experience side of it and the Christian Brothers side of it, but I really enjoyed the learning process, and also knowing, you know, there was a little fear in learning, because it was like, well, if you don't get at least 7 O levels, I mean, what are you going to do with your life? And if you don't get at least 3 A levels, what are you going to do with your life? And I remember my art teacher was a guy called A.J. Palmer. He was not only the art teacher, my A-level art teacher, but he was also the guy that taught me the church organ, because I ended up being the church organist at Pride Park College, which was brilliant. Because when White a Shade of Pale came out, right, I would be playing.
You were there. I love it.
I was before the Christian Brothers hit the chapel. I was like da 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 da. Right, it's like the whole, and the boys are like, yeah, this is really cool. And then all of a sudden, I'd switch into minor chords, you know, the churchy thing.
Yeah,
it was great. No, I remember the art teacher one day saying, and this never left me. The art classroom was away from the main study hall, so we're up on the hill a little bit in a different building, and so we're all there with our easels. And he gave us a still life to do one night. So, you know, the bottle, the grapes, the oranges, and the whole 9 yards. But what we had figured out was that we had an hour and a half. We had enough time to sneak up the hill, leap over the wall, go to the off license, get a couple of bottles of cider, and sit off in the field and smoke a few ciggies and drink the cider, right? And then, but then you got to come back down, quickly do, you know, the art, because the next morning Palmer's going to come in and say, you know, walk up and down the aisle, looking at everyone's easels. And I never forget, he walked in one morning, he looked at this one guy. He actually ended up becoming a great artist anyway. He looked at this guy, and his name is Ned Ingram, and he looked at Ned's art. He says, do you want to be a 9-to-5er? Is that what you want to be? You're painting like a 9-to-5er. It's boring. And I thought, not to sound disrespectful at all to anybody that works 9 to 5, because it's not the point. The point was, it's a mental thing. Think outside the box, man. Don't be boring. Think outside the box. You always just want to be in a box all your life. Yeah. And as musicians, we're not, because we're all and we sink or swim by it. You know, we sink or swim by it. We have great moments. We have moments of where business is good, where everyone's booming along really good, and we have moments where, you know, there's a downtime or whatever. That's the arts. The arts are up and down.
Yeah.
And you know, if you make it big and you're really successful, become a national artist, that's a whole different thing. You know, that's you know, that I've had a good life in doing what I've done, but you know, a good life can get sidetracked real quick when something like this COVID has come along. So getting back to that, we have been sidetracked. We've all been sidetracked. And that's why, you know, getting back to the point of me talking to you, hope, you know, we're living a long dark night. You know, I want to see my favorite band. I want to be able to go to a football game, be in the stands chanting and cheering. And so that's what the song does. It talks to that. I hope people will, you know, feel what the song is about and embrace it. And it's, you know, it's really great that you had me on to talk to you about Hope and all the guys and how we did it.
No, it is brilliant, and I think what becomes inspirational is when you look at that and the people that you get and so on and so forth. But just to complete the story, I mean, you're at yes. Cornell. Your father fell out with his business partner, didn't he? And you came back to Bermuda. So you started working at 40 Thieves. As I understand it, you then at that stage will say, look, well, that time has sort of finished. It's now the disco era, and you went into that sort of side. Talk me through that period.
Well, yes, that's right. I came back and we were doing bands like Peaches and Herb and Gary U.S. Bonds and people like that. But it was tough because the numbers weren't so good anymore. You know, live entertainment was getting more expensive. The costs of bringing them in, the whole 9 yards. And so I said to Dad, you know, this disco was going great. You know, Saturday Night Fever was just coming out. The Bee Gees Saturday Night Fever. Stigwood was living in Bermuda.
Right.
And then I didn't meet him until after I opened the first disco. It was called Disco 40. And we opened it in March of 1978. And shortly after that, I got to meet Robert and, you know, that whole Stigwood crowd. And we became, you know, pretty good friends. And he would come down to the club. And if he had somebody from out of town, he'd bring them down, whether it be, you know, Andy Gibb or Andrew Lloyd Webber and stuff like that. They would come in and we'd sit off and he'd sort of, well, do you have any Cristal, Tony? Of course, Robert, whatever you want. So off we would go and have a good old time. But the disco thing came in and then it was so good. It was so good that at the time we were renting the building. We bought the building. My dad bought the building. It wasn't me. My dad bought the building, and then we built a second disco on the next floor. So we had two.
Right.
And it was booming away. And after in the middle of 1981, I thought, you know, it'd be really great to get back to live music. So we converted the original disco on the ground floor back to live music. And then we opened up with Ramsey Lewis, and then we had Billy Preston and Stanley Turrentine and a whole different. But that got tough too because, you know, it was expensive to do. But it was really good to get the club up and running and get a little, you know, get the people excited about it. And then we started bringing in really good bands from the East Coast that were, you know, they were cover bands, but they were really good ones. We got really good ones, and so that lasted for up until around 1977 or so, and then in 1978, I tried one more time to revamp the club and create sort of an island music club in a calypso band from the Barbados called the Merrymen, and we tried to do all that kind of thing, and it just wasn't working anymore. And so, you know, it was at that point my dad said, "Look, I want to retire and move to Florida, and let's sell the building and good luck. Yeah. You know, figure it out." So that's what happened. He took off, and I ended up started playing for a living. That's what I did. I played from 1989.
And we touched on it earlier, and then some phenomenal highlights. I mean, 1985 with Live Aid. I mean, you did the Bermuda portion of that. Yeah. How did that come about?
Well, that was really interesting. So the Live Aid thing in Bermuda was, a bunch of really good comedians got together, and we had a committee, and we worked it all out. Some advertising people, different bar owners and stuff like that. But I railroaded the whole thing together because of the way it worked was that we had a band at the time called Rhinos Express playing at the club. And that was John Rhino Edwards, who went on to be bass player with Status Quo for years.
Yeah.
But I first met Rhino when he came to Bermuda with Climax Blues Band. And then, of course, he was with Dexys Midnight Runners, and then my dear friend from Weybridge, Judy Zook. And so I've known Reiner for a long time. And so he had this great band, and he had Andy Hamilton on sax, and he had Spike Edney on keys. And all of a sudden, like, this Live Aid appears out of nowhere. And as you even saw in the Queen movie, you know, how fast Live Aid was put together, how they put that together in that short period of time was phenomenal. And they put it together. And what happened was, Rhino said to me, well, look, 3 of the guys have got to leave the gig and go back to England. He says, but don't worry, I've got subs coming out. So they flew subs out to Bermuda. And 3 of them went. I forget, there was a guitar player, but I forget his name now. And he played, which band he was in. But Andy Hamilton was saxophone player for Bob Geldof, Boomtown Rats. And Spike Edney was backup keys for Queen, right? He was the one on the side of the stage, what you didn't see. But anyway, so Live Aid comes, and of course we have the telethon in Bermuda. We raised $210,000 in this little tiny island.
I think so that's the second highest per capita in the world, wasn't it? Very generous.
It was fantastic. And the local TV stations, all the bars got together, and the Bank of Butterfield organized handling the money, right, and the whole 9 yards. So what happened then was when the guys got back from England, from Live Aid, Andy Hamilton calls up Geldof and he says, look, these guys in Bermuda, we're playing this gig in Bermuda, they raised all this money. He says, happy Jesus, I better come down there and kick up the loot. So, he shows up in Bermuda about a month after Live Aid. It was probably, I think by the time Geldof came here, Rhino had already finished the gig, and so those guys had left and gone back to England. But Geldof came with Chris Morrison, who was his manager, and with Simon Le Bon. Yeah. So those 3 came down, and it was great because it was a big official thing. And Sir John Swan was the Premier of Bermuda at the time, and the Governor, Viscount Don Russell, and we had this police motorcade from the airport to Hamilton, and there was a huge crowd out front. And they just thought it was fantastic, and it was fantastic. And then the next thing, Stigwood calls up and he says, "Oh, Tony, would you like to have Simon Le Bon and Bob Hilton favour for that? Would you like to have that? I've got John Travolta here for the weekend. I'm sure you'd like to meet him." So all of that kind of stuff went on, right? And so it was great. It was fantastic. But what was great is that you know, this island raised so much money for that cause at the time.
And charity has been a big part of what you do. I mean, you've been a number of other charities that you get involved with, including using music therapy for dementia. And it's a big thing that they've had at the moment. And we have over here, you probably know Nordorf Robbins, who do tremendous amount of work with music therapy. And a couple of the images that they've had on the news over here, we've had with Paul Harvey, who was the chap with Alzheimer's, and basically he's a fantastic composer, and all of a sudden through music he's been able to communicate again. And the other one was that wonderful ballerina. I don't know if you saw the footage of that with Marta Saldana.
Yes,
who was an old principal ballerina.
That was fantastic. That was very touching. And you know, the other thing was that a former girlfriend of mine, her mother had Alzheimer's, as did my granny. And when I went to see my granny she was in this care home in Havant in 1979. Was the last time I saw her. It was my first experience of dealing with walking right into the wall of what that was. And she was there, but she wasn't there. And after all the years of knowing her, and, you know, being a wonderful grandmother, and I walked into this place and I say, "Hi, Nana, how are you?" And it's like, "Hi, Nana, how are you?" And it was just devastating. So anyway, my dear friend, her mother had Alzheimer's, and you know, watched all that process play out. And when she passed away, she decided to start a charity in Bermuda, Action on Alzheimer's and Dementia. And after about a year or so, I think I've been doing it about 6 years now. After about a year, she called me up. She said, "Would you like to come and play guitar?" And I said, "Yeah, okay." And then I just didn't. And then she called me up another month or two later. "Hey, you know, would you like to come and play guitar and blah blah blah, sing some songs for the people in the group?" So I went, and literally from that moment on, I never stopped because it was so magical to watch. The people respond to music, and so what you do is you like you've done a little research on me. I did a little research on what people of their age group would have liked. So, I was doing stuff like Me and My Shadow, and When You're Smiling, and doing the old tunes, right? And you watch their faces like sort of and come alive. And there was a movie that was made called it won the Sundance Film Festival. Alive Inside, it was.
Oh yes, yeah.
And great, and it was where they discovered you program, little Apple iPhone, the miniature iPods, whatever. Yeah. And you program it with music that you knew Granny liked or whatever, and you actually saw in that movie how people would be sitting in a chair, and just staring, and all of a sudden music would come on, and they'd be like, and they start tapping the fingers, and it's the power of music that Alzheimer's. Somehow the music gets through to other parts of the brain and shakes them up a little bit, whereas otherwise they'd just be sitting there.
You're right. And there's the Spanish initiative is where Saldana, the ballerina, came from, called Music to Awaken. It probably sounds better in Spanish, but that's sort of, absolutely how Spanish is. But it's so powerful, and using music for good in that way. It is the universal language, and that's what I love about it. You can do that. So as a music therapist, you can understand that. And people, they always say you lose your relatives twice when you have dementia. You lose them many years ago when dementia sets in, because they don't recognize you, and it's soul destroying. So anything that you can do to communicate has got to be encouraged, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that it's just to give up a bit of time to be able to do things like this is very, very rewarding, to be honest. And I just don't even think about it. Now, what we did because of COVID, what we did was Liz called me up and she said, we're going to do Zoom sessions. And this is how that's like we are right now. I mean, it was like, okay, well, how's this going to work? Anyway, we started doing it, and they would sit in front of the screens and I'll start playing the music, and then they, so now what we've done is we've cultivated, now that we've got people that can come back to the church hall where I go to do this, where they physically come with their caregivers or family members. So now what we have is we have the laptop on a little piano stool next to me, so that the people that don't want to come out of their homes can be on the laptop, and then the people that are sitting in front of me are there. So then we have them all talk to each other if they can talk to each other, because dementia is gradual. Some people when they first come in, they can have a conversation. They can be very repetitive, as you know. They repeat. But there's one lady that comes to all the sessions. She likes to get up and dance. She likes to dance to I play a little Elvis Presley. So she dances to, you ain't nothing but a hound dog or something like that. And up she gets, and of course she's there physically dancing in front of me, and then the people on the laptop are watching, and they're all laughing and having a good time. So it's really quite. There are some bright sparks about what this COVID's done.
I think you're absolutely. We always talk about. I mean, even though money has been tight for everybody because they're not out there performing, the wonderful definition of a fee is a fair exchange of energy. And if you can turn around and bring a bit of light into somebody's life in that sort of way, I'll tell you, that is so rewarding, isn't it? I mean, seeing the smile, we're in tears when you see the ballerina, the principal ballerina, Swan Lake, you put the music in and she just reenacts the moves.
That was stunning. I mean, that's
amazing.
It was stunning. It was absolutely brilliant.
I mean, never let the truth stand in the way of a good story. It was actually from a few years earlier, is the truth of the matter, 2019, but it was still, it shows the power of music.
Of course.
The other great inspirational thing that you've done, Tony, is you have immersed in music, but you've also had a few other ventures as well. I mean, you talked about Bermuda.com, which was a wise business decision. How did that come about?
Well, I've been in Barbados, where I go every year, my home away from home. I've got so many great friends in Barbados. Hello, Barbados. I noticed these little advertising, little mini flyer boxes everywhere with little tiny flyers. And it was like, the common was, 10% off on our restaurant or 5% off on the scuba diving trip. And I thought, well, they don't have that in Bermuda. So I brought it to Bermuda. Had a wonderful carpenter make me about 50 boxes. And I went around all the hotels. I said, will you take these boxes? And everyone said, yes. And then it was a brand new thing. And I went around, I sold the flyers. And then a friend of mine, who was a drummer in Bermuda, was a Canadian guy. He now lives in Las Vegas, a guy called John. He said, listen, I've just bought in a third of Bermuda.com. He said, you know something, if we marry the flyer business with the cyber business, this will be really cool. Yeah. He said, so listen, let's do it. He says, so why don't you buy in? So what I did is I bought in and I bought the other guys out, right? And then John said to me, well, I'm leaving Bermuda now, you can buy me out. So anyway, I ended up owning the whole thing. So so what I did was, it was an advertising business. So I had physical and I had cyber. And so it was in the early stages of, doing banner ads and flashing banner ads and, flash, that flash stuff that when they spin it, it used to annoy a lot of people on the internet. But anyway, I managed to go around and get just almost every business in Bermuda to advertise on Bermuda.com. The banks, the hotels, you name it, the restaurants, like scuba diving trips, the whole 9 yards. And it built up to be really, really good. And then I thought, well, I've built up this big advertising thing. Why don't I sell it while I'm at the top of the game? Because what I saw happening, I saw what was going on with Google, and I saw how they were trying to monetize themselves. And I said, these guys are going to revolutionize what's going on. And owning a country domain name at the time was worth its weight in gold, because you became, but now everyone just goes on and plugs into Google ads and plugs into Facebook ads and YouTube ads and stuff like that. And so I sold it to a newspaper here, and that newspaper went out of business, and it was passed on to the only remaining newspaper in Bermuda called the Royal Gazette. So they now own Bermuda.com. But
the figures they report in the press, they say you invested 200,000 and sold it for, was it 10 times as much? Are those right?
That's well, about 200 grand, and I sold it for 1.7 million.
There you go. Brilliant. There you go. That's not bad. $35 to buy it originally, I think.
But here, this is where Tony went wrong. And you know what? I thought, I know a little bit about investing.
Oh, go on then.
Oh yeah, I know a little bit. I have friends that have done really well in the stock market. I can do the same thing. I told you all you need to know.
And that's the problem, isn't it? Because sometimes it's like a gambler, isn't it? It's like a gambler. You get your winnings. You suddenly think that everything you touch, you've got the golden touch, Midas, and then you suddenly think, well, I've got all this money. I better multiply it. It's not enough 1.79 million or whatever it is. I want to keep going. And you're right. What did you invest in? What did you invest in?
Well, that was the problem. See, I went into risky stuff, and I should have just did what my two friends that taught me everything I know today about computers, who are actually a computer software business. Yeah. I should have just bought Microsoft stock.
Hindsight is that great educator, isn't it?
Yes. In 2004, if I'd have just stuck it into Microsoft stock, I'd be fine. But look, woulda, coulda, shoulda. I mean, it's fine. Life is not so bad. I live in a beautiful place. Is it easy for people right now? It's not easy for a lot of us, because a lot of us have not been working. Yeah. And so all of us, what it does, it makes you realize what the important things are in life. Yeah. What counts.
You're absolutely right, and we touched on music being really important. But what's really interesting, Tony, lots of lessons, lots of life lessons, which is why it's so great to speak with you, is that in addition to that, so you spotted that opportunity, you bought the domain name, made money on that, invested, and there's a lesson there, as you say. But also you got involved with sport. So talk to me. You did beach tennis as well. How did that come about?
I was in Aruba on holiday, and I've always been a tennis player, I play tennis a lot. And so I was looking good for guys to hit with. And so they said, well, these two Dutch guys here who are the best coaches in Aruba. So I went down and I hit with them, Joachim and Sjoerd. And the next thing they say, hey, you know, we're starting up this new sport on the beach in Aruba. It's called beach tennis. And kind of sort of originated out of Italy and Europe. Yeah. And, I mean, you go to a place like Ravenna, the marina, just south of Venice. I mean, every beach is full of beach tennis courts, and you see them in Spain or whatever. They play beach tennis all over the world now. But anyway, I got into it so big, and I started it here. And then we started doing international tournaments. I got the government of Bermuda to help sponsor it, help put up prize money. I got some reinsurance companies to help sponsor prize money. Ace Insurance, which are now called Chubb, and different people like that. And we brought players in from Italy, Aruba, Brazil, Germany, Holland, and stuff like this. And it was really, really good. And then what happened was my timing got really bad with beach tennis. And that 3 years in a row, we got hit by hurricanes on or around the week of scheduling a tournament. And so it just, oh man, what bad luck. We've got the whole thing going. People have flown in now, they can't play. And because, you know, if it's on the beach, what happens with the hurricane? The beaches disappear.
Yeah, it's not the best place to play in the hurricane.
They disappear, and you know, they don't get, you know, the sand doesn't get washed back in for a number of days, if not weeks. And so at the end of the day, I had a nice run of beach tennis. It was from 2008 to 2014. And I was getting older, and my partner, he had other life priorities and stuff like this. So it would have been great if it kept going, but it didn't. But I still love it. I still love the people that are connected to it. Yeah.
But it's another example, and what's, as I say, it's really inspirational to talk about these things, because everybody always talks about the successes. They very rarely talk about the failures that led to that success, and you have to always reinvent yourself. And when you're talking about, as you say in the single, it's all about hope. It's not just sitting down, and people get knocked down all the time. You're the original Weevil, if you like. You might knock you down, but you come back up again.
Well, I get knocked down. What's that song? I get knocked down, but I get up again.
Yeah, exactly. But you do. That's the great thing. Or you divert your energies onto more charitable things as well. So you do the great things, the John Lennon tribute and Peace Day concerts and things like that, raising lots of money. And that's how you work with Judy on that sort of side. How did that come about? How did you decide to focus your energies there?
The thing was I've been, a friend of mine owns the Masterworks Museum, or was the curator, and round he got the whole thing going. A guy called Tom Butterfield here, beautiful museum in the Botanical Gardens, and he tried to get a John Lennon tribute thing going years and years ago, and he'd written to Yoko, and he didn't get much love about it at the time, and he was busy at the time building his museum, and so he had to focus on that. And then I was in there one day, we were talking about this, and he said, I'd really like to revisit this, and blah blah blah. So I said, well, look, I tell you what, without you should really get Yoko's blessing on this, because she controls the Lennon estate and so on and so forth. So I reached out to Andy Newmark, because Andy Newmark, who played on Hope, played on Double Fantasy, and so I said, Andy. So Andy reached out, made me the introduction to Yoko's office, and we worked it out with them, and we went through different phases of what that tribute would be like. And we were talking to different sculptors about a sculpture of John Lennon. Right. And Julian Lennon said to me, he says, Tony, please do not do a bronze sculpture of Dad. He said, it's just so many of them, and I don't like any of them. And he said, just do something different, plant a tree, do whatever. So anyway, we thought about this, and we went to an artist in Bermuda called Graham Foster, who's a fantastic artist, really, really good. And so he created a a disc, a sort of a circular disc,
right?
And he used kind of cool imagery. He used the sort of outline of a Rickenbacker guitar, and he had P stubs in it, and he was the hint of the round Lennon glasses and so on and so forth. But it was sort of abstract, and I sent it off to Yoko, and they liked it, and we actually hand carried up to her a whole bunch of thumbnail sketches of all the drawings that Graham had done.
Right.
And then she said, okay, this is great. And then it led to, she did a forward to the book, and she did a little video for it, and it was great. And we had a bunch of artists do a tribute CD of Lennon songs, or favorite Beatles songs that Lennon was, had sung. Except Maxie Priest chose All My Loving. I said, but Maxie, Paul sang that one. He said, but I like it. I said, okay, I'm doing that one. I go, okay. It wasn't a John song, but it's okay. So anyway,
it's a tribute. You can do the tribute part of it. That's okay.
Well, best thing about All My Loving was John's rhythm playing in it. It was brilliant. 16th notes on the guitar, but no. So it all went very well. It was a tribute record and stuff like that, and loads of artists: Brian Ferry, Judy Zook, Heather Nova, Nils Lofgren with Andy Newmark. Rhino played on it. Rhino Edwards, he did come together. So it was a great project, and we raised probably about $140,000 for charity through that. So that was good. And it's as you say, you get knocked up again, you knock down, you get up again. And Andy Newmark always says, I think his nickname for me is he's the Lazarus from Bermuda. Yes. And I've been very fortunate. I've had a few knocks in my day. Some of them self-earned, some of them, things that I shouldn't have done or whatever. Or said.
The great thing about it as well, though, Tony, is that a lot of these people, such as Julie that you mentioned, and when we first touched base, you were on the phone to her. This is what happened. And Michael and so on and so forth. They become personal friends because you're real. You work on the basis. You've got these shared experiences. They're not always going to work out. You're going to go through difficult times together. You treat people as though they're people. They're not necessarily the big superstars all the time. They don't have to be on all the time. They can just be real with you, can't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's when I go over to somebody's house for tea just because they've had a hit record, it's just all going over for tea. Yeah. I don't even think about it. It's just that's the way it is, and so yeah, it's great to have a lot of friends in the music business. How
did you meet Michael then? Because obviously I get all the musicians and so on and so forth and the connections there. How did you meet Michael Douglas?
Well, Michael's mother's from Bermuda, Diana. Diana married Kirk, and Michael spent a lot of summer holidays growing up. He used to come in the 40 Fees and hang out. Right. And during college weeks when we were all teenagers, sort of try and get a dance an American college student or whatever. And so we didn't know each other back then, but we met each other a number of years back, a long time back. So we, it's just as if, somebody like your neighbor down the road from where you live, you go say, hey, Bill, hey, Steve, whatever. And so whenever he's here, usually have a lunch or do something like that. And so I haven't seen him for a little while. The last time I saw him was just before he did the Kaminsky method, which was I know for guys like us, we relate to the Kaminsky method. I mean, you've got to watch it. It's great. The humor is great for guys that are still trying to be teenagers, but they're not. But it's a great. But so I haven't seen him. But I saw him just before he did that. But as I say, he got in touch when I sent him the track of Hope. And he just came back
totally behind it, and Julian, you can understand why Julian got behind it and things like that. Where would you go for lunch? Would you go and have some fish chowder? Isn't that your favorite?
Fish chowder, yeah. I do all that fish chowder. Listen, in Bermuda, the beauty of people coming to Bermuda is that no one bugs anybody. It doesn't matter who you are. In fact, You know, I would swear to you, this is how Bermuda is, right? If the Rolling Stones came down here and did a gig on the National Stadium on the football pitch, right? There would be, this is how Bermudians are. They're so matter of fact. Hey, did you go see the Rolling Stones last week? You go, yeah, well, I was going to do it, but, you know, I just been out fishing and, you know, I was tired. And I didn't, you know, well, they're coming the game, right? I go, no, well, no, but that's how they are, right? Yeah. It's just, yeah, I mean, it's, you know, you either get excited, you do something, or you don't, you know, it's sort of, fortunately, I've been fairly successful when I brought people here to play, of creating enough buzz to get people. You got to create the buzz. You got to. That's business. You got to do the hype. You got to do the marketing. You got to get people excited to come and see. I mean, when I had Squeeze come here and Paul McCartney and people like that, you know, you get out there and you appeal to markets depending on what your act is. So we have a big expat community in Bermuda. So yeah, I just knew that Squeeze would go down and bomb with the expat community, all the accountants that are working here, and you know, for the accounting companies and the nurses or whatever it is, and they would go to see a band like that. Now, you know, you bring in a reggae artist like Maxi Priest or Shaggy or whatever like that. So, you know, you were going to get more Black Bermudian crowd. You know, what I think works best is bringing artists that are crossover, that appeal to two markets. Yeah. You know, if you can find it, if you can get that to work, that's really good in a place like
and still offering fees of $10,000. You would have got the Beatles for that. That's
yeah, $10,000. Yeah, I mean, I was very lucky with Andy Newmark. You know, what we did was, again, it was one of those things where we called up when we brought Squeeze and bands like that. We just knew we couldn't afford this, and neither could the hotel that had invested in this little club on Front Street. It was called the Surf Club. We couldn't afford to pay people a performing fee, so we put it out to them. Look, you want a 2-week holiday? The hotel will put you up. You can bring your wives. Oh, yeah. You can bring your girlfriends. And you know, all the back lines there. Yeah. You know, we got, you know, we got the drums, the bass amps, the guitars. We had 3 or 4 different guitars, amps to choose from. And all they had to do was bring the guitars or the, you know, horns or whatever they do. You know, drummers bring a set of sticks, and you're off to the races. And so that worked. That you listen. That was 20 years ago. It was the last time we went down that road. Now, people listen. If I want to go on a holiday, Tony, yeah, I'll pay to go on my own holiday. If you want me to come, this is my fee, and it's become much more business oriented now. You know, you want an act, you got to pay for it, and that's really where it's at. And I understand it. I understand,
and especially now they've got to all get back and try and start the money game. And
I think that the boom, the what's going to be the positive thing is once we get enough people vaccinated in England, America, and you know, Europe and over the world over, and we can start getting back on doing all these concerts, and you know, the West End opens up again, Broadway opens up again, and it'll come a lot. But you can imagine what the pent-up energy to be able, I want to go. And what was one of the things that Harvey said in his interview? He says, listen, I took deposits on shows that I've had to cancel. He said, I barely had to refund a penny. They've all said, don't worry, hold it, we'll come in, right? So when it does get going again, you know, I just hope that it doesn't take too long, because so I do want to see a few people, because the window's shrinking on some of them.
Yeah. Absolutely, and as you say, go and see Bruce and the E Street Band. You've got to do all of that sort of stuff. Right. Make that make sense. And Harvey's right. Lots of people have. I have a business with RJ Gibb, the son of Robin from the Bee Gees, and we were going to be doing a tour with him and so on and so forth. And you have to, and the fans have been very good, because you have to hold on to your tickets, because the gigs will come about If you if demand the money back, you've got a problem, because then all the people will collapse and so on and so forth. They're all dependent on this sort of stuff as a sort of guarantee, if you like. The other thing that you do, apart from the wonderful charity, you're raising money for the kids, you're doing wonderful stuff with music therapy, you're also a same-sex marriage counsellor and advocate. How's that going?
I'm not a counsellor. Okay, this is what happened. In a nutshell, I was reading the local paper. It was in April of 2015 about a same-sex couple that were denied the right to marry on a cruise ship in the Mediterranean. And the captain said the reason being is that the cruise lines registries in Bermuda, and under the government of Bermuda, same-sex marriage is not permissible. And because this ship is quote unquote under the Bermuda flag, I can't marry you on this ship. And I thought, this is ridiculous in this day and age. And so I started a petition. It caught on fire. And I guess I started the ball rolling. But what happened was it picked up speed. The LGBT community in Bermuda got involved in not that they weren't anyway, but a lawyer got involved, and we got a gay couple that we did a test thing where we applied for a marriage license. They got turned down, and then that's when the legal challenge came in. And then we took it to the court. We took it to the Supreme Court. We won the first challenge in the Supreme Court. We won the appeal in the Supreme Court when the government appealed it, and then they appealed it again to the Court of Appeal. And we won that, and we've just, when I say we, the case was then handled by Lord David Pannick, a very well-known British QC, as you know, yes. And he handled it on behalf of the case for same-sex marriage. And of course, the government had their own QC in England, but with the Privy Council, and that was heard on the 3rd and 4th of February. I've stepped back on this because it's taken its own course. But I'm proud of the work that I did to get the ball rolling and to get the awareness going. And I just believe that, but it's also taught me a lesson in other ways, because equality, you just can't say equality is, well, worry about gay folks. What about women? What about Black people and what they've had to put up through? And I got pulled aside over the fact, you need to show more concern about other issues. And so I've taken a more sort of, now that I'm a little older, and I now take the view that fighting causes takes a lot of energy out of you, right? You have to be in it, and you have to be passionate about it, but you don't realize what a toll it takes when you're doing that. And so once it was all over, and I took a deep breath, and I thought, I just don't know whether I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to focus on music and focus on trying to get through this boy's life, as best I can, still doing, what's good and what's right. And, that's the important part. But I've retired as a political activist, as any kind of activism. I did my thing. And I actually used to have musicians say, Tony, why are you worrying yourself, man, about all these other causes? Just play music. And some people do worry themselves about causes. John Lennon took causes to heart. Other artists do take causes to heart. And so I'm glad what I did for the efforts that I made. And I'm hopeful that the Privy Council will rule in favor of this and put this thing to bed. And everyone just says, okay, fine. Let's just carry on with life and marry who you want. Love as the Doobie Brothers say, love the one you're with.
Absolutely, it's great advice. Finally, Tony, then, I mean, it's a phenomenal career, and you've been very generous in sharing the ups and downs, the trials and tribulations, and virtually everything, because so many life lessons for people. Are there any big regrets that you have?
Yeah, I have regrets. I have regrets, and but and you learn from those. You just learn from those, whether or not.
What's your biggest regret? I mean, I get the thing that you learn the lessons. You are, as I say, the weeble wobble, but you don't fall down. You keep reinventing yourself. What's been your biggest regret?
I think, to be honest, I think it would have. I wished I was more communicative, and I wish my parents were more communicative with me growing up. I think I was allowed to be a little bit too wild growing up, and I became very much like Tony's way. This is the way I want to do it, and I was, there's a term that they use in Bermuda. It's called bullheaded. He's a bullheaded boy, right. I could, I probably wish I'd been more reflective and thought sometimes before I opened my mouth. Sometimes you get into trouble saying the wrong things and upset and hurt people. I wished I things like that, whether it be in relationships or even just family exchanges. But is there anything that I can say that it's something so horrible that it's I'm never going to get rid of the pain in my heart? No, I don't. Have I done a lot of reflection? Yes, I think a lot of people do this. A lot of people, it's like,
Oh, no, absolutely. And again, it's that sort of honesty, which is great. What's your proudest moment? I mean, so many you could highlight from what you've listed. What would be your proudest achievement?
That's a really good question. I hope it's still coming. That's what I'm going to say to you. Right. I hope that I think it's still to come. But there's been lots of good things. I've been blessed to have met some really good people. My father was great, but he was the typical guy, a typical father from those times where, he always wanted him to say, "Gee, son, I really think that's great what you've learned on the guitar today." But he could never ever say that. He could only say, I said, "What do you think?" He would only say, "Oh, it's not bad." Was never anything as fantastic. And that's what, so when I see people with their kids, and I see a lot of families now who really, really put their effort into their kids, right? And when I see them say, "Gee, son, that was really, really good. You go, boy." That's got to be such a good feeling for a kid. So when you think back on it, you think, "Well, Jesus, Dad did never really." But what did happen was when he was in his 70s and he wasn't well, shortly before he died, he did say to me, just as my mother said to me, there came that moment where they said, "I'm really proud of everything you did." And I'd say, "Well, thank you for everything." I mean, when I went to Cornell University, I didn't want to go. I went because he sort of like said, "Well, you're moping around. You've been on the Tom Jones tour. I think you need to get an education." And I wanted to join a band with Paul Muggleton in England and just be a rocker, right? And something he basically made it sound too good to refuse. This would be you'd be really pleasing your parents if you would go, and you won't regret it. And so I just wanted to do music, but then I got a degree in hotel management. I've never run a hotel in my life. Anyway.
Did you? I mean, it's always interesting people's relationships with their parents, and as you say, those are sometimes the most important things. Is for parents to say they love you, that they say they're proud of you. Did your parents ever say that to you? You said they said they're proud of you, and not on their last few moments. Did they say they loved you?
No, they didn't. I knew that they loved me because they would buy, they would put a roof over your head. You got really good food cooked for you as a kid growing up. But they never said the things that what I would have loved to have heard. They never said, "I really love you, son." They never said that. And I think that there was a stiff upper lip English thing that went on after the war. We've been through the hard times, and children should be seen and not heard, and stuff. And so what I say is I like my niece and my nephew have wonderful families, and it's just so great to see how different they parent compared to what our generation, how our parents parented us. Not that it was wrong, it was just that there wasn't the overt love shown.
It's
I don't know,
isn't it? Because I talk to a lot of people about this, and sometimes that's the most important thing, isn't it? And it's those simple words, just to say that I love you, or to say that you're proud of your children. That we're the generation, we're better at that now, I think, aren't we?
But yeah, I think we are. But then the other thing is that what happens is when you become a teenager, there is the rebellion anyway. So you're pushing against them anyway. You're like, I know, Dad, don't tell me what to do. I never forget my father said to me when I came back from England when I was about 14. He says, "Son, I need to sit you down. I need to ask you a question." And he says, "Have you heard about the birds and the bees?" This is sex education 101, right? And I said, "Oh, John, I know all about it." He went, "Oh, thank God for that." That was the end of it. The end of it. He was so nervous. He didn't want to go there. It was like, obviously, my mum had said, "You better sit him down and tell him what this is all about," right? And I just said, that was the end of it. We never discussed it ever again. It was never discussed. So everybody went off, and I wish I had to be honest, I think proper sex education is real important for kids. But I think a lot of people just don't get it, and it's certainly not. It was taboo to even talk about it. I went to a Catholic boarding school. My Lord, women we were told by the Christian brothers that women were the very agents of the devil himself, who would lead a Catholic boy down the road to hell. I mean, imagine that. And we're going like, well, I guess we're going to spend a lot of time in hell then. What's a boy to say to a statement like that? But anyway,
absolutely. And finally, then, Tony, how would you like to be remembered?
I don't really care about that. I mean, I don't care about it. People,
you're somebody who likes to talking to you are somebody who likes to make a difference, and so
listen. I honestly think that I was thinking about this the other day. Obviously, because you think more about I think more about what time have I got left, because I see the clock is tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. And you hear, "Oh, did you hear about Joe? He just passed away." Like, you hear about this and that and the friends, and we've seen it in the music business with John Prine catching COVID, or different, stuff, things that have happened to people, and you go, well, I've got the memories of my people that are close. And then I was thinking, you know what? At the end of the day, outside your family, really, you live this life. Once you're not here anymore, it's everyone's about living. I think life is about living. I think once you're dead and you're gone, okay. If somebody says, "Well, do you remember when Tony did this?" Or, "Do you remember when Paul McCartney did that?" Or, "Do you remember when you, Andrew, did that?" And so people go, "Yeah," and it lasts for a fleeting second. It's only going to be fleeting seconds here and there. In terms, okay, now if you've been a prime minister and you're written about in history books, or you've been a famous musical artist, and they say that, well, in 100 years' time, well, there was a guy called Paul McCartney and John Lennon from Liverpool wrote 300 songs or whatever. and that would be part of music history. But I just actually don't think about the other side, because I just know that this is the side, this is the only side that I know I can deal with, because I don't really want to think about the other side, and I don't care what happens after I'm gone. I mean, I'm just a guy that lives in Bermuda that happens to have been able to connect a bunch of dots in his life. That's it.
And it's extraordinary bunch of dots it's been, but a great message. I love the message in this. I love the single.
Thank you.
That the whole group of people, it is a who's who of the music industry, the perfect strangers. Are you going to do more together?
You know what? The answer to that question is, I said to Jimmy's written a lot of songs during the COVID situation. I mean, what's a poor boy to do? I mean, I think everybody that in the music business has been sitting there writing and putting out. And no doubt there's going to be a lot of subject matter on everyone's reflection about this time of life. But yes, Jimmy's written songs, and he's written a really good song called Gratitude. Now, I know lots of people have had songs called Gratitude, John Mayer and others, but it's a really good song. And we've been talking about using, you know, who out of the group that played on this one, if they want to do another track. Yeah, we'd like to keep now that we've got this sort of quirky thing going with the Perfect Strangers, why not keep it going? So yes,
perfect. Gratitude is good. Hope, faith, charity, and gratitude. There you go. You get all four. We'll have a whole album soon. It'd be lovely. Yeah. Tony, it's been an absolute delight. Thank you for a full and frank interview. Lots of life lessons there. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you. And I just say to your listening audience, I just hope that you will connect with the song. And thanks for having me on it. It means a lot to the guys. And I know, so they'll probably go, what were you doing talking about yourself for an hour? I had nothing to do with that, fellas. It's a guy called Andrew who's asking me a bunch of questions. But anyway, we got to have hope.
We've got to have hope. I get that. Fantastic message. Fantastic. And brilliant. It is. It raises your spirits. We were talking about that earlier. It's a fantastic track. And I look forward to Gratitude and all the other ones as well. Tony Brannon, thank you very much for joining me.
And we'll hope to see you again.
Absolutely. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Cheers. Thank you so much.
So thank you again to Tony Brannon for being my very special guest. Do get hold of a copy of Hope, Perfect Strangers, a brilliant message with the world's great and the good, connected with virtually every artist that ever there was is associated with this. I love the sentiment behind it. I love the track. And it was great speaking to Tony about all of those things in his extraordinary life. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have any comments, you can write to me at guests@octopustv.com. That's guests@octopustv.com. Don't forget, you can follow me at Andrew Eborn @octopustv, and you can subscribe on all of the usual platforms. But for me, for now, thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.